When my son told me I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner at his clinic's annual celebration, I smiled, nodded, and made one phone call. By Valentine's Day, his medical license was suspended, his clinic was under federal investigation, and his marriage was crumbling under the weight of bankruptcy proceedings. Justice must be served, and arrogance must be corrected. You won't believe what a supposedly senile old surgeon can do when he stops shaking and starts cutting. But to understand how one phone call dismantled a $2 million medical practice, you need to know about the 35 years that led to this moment. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The call came on December 3rd at 4:47 p.m., right as I was reviewing a journal article on minimally invasive valve replacement techniques. I'd been retired from Johns Hopkins for 2 years, but old habits die hard. A surgeon's mind doesn't retire just because his hands do. Dad, it's David. My son's voice carried that clinical efficiency I'd taught him during his residency. No warmth, no small talk, just the facts. I wanted to let you know that we're changing the format for the clinic's Christmas celebration this year. I set down the journal, already sensing the tremor that had nothing to do with age. Oh? What kind of changes? It's going to be more of a professional networking event. Sophia's idea. His wife, Dr. Sophia Chen Hart, aesthetic surgeon and social climber extraordinaire. We're inviting potential investors, referring physicians, some board members from Swedish Medical Center. It's important for the clinic's growth. Sounds impressive, I said, waiting for the invitation that should have come next. It didn't come. The silence stretched between us like the pause before a diagnosis you don't want to hear. I've delivered enough bad news in my career to recognize the cadence, the careful breath, the slight hesitation before the words that would change everything. Dad, this isn't really your kind of event. It's very formal, very professional. Sophia thinks it would be better if we kept it to current practitioners and potential partners. My hand tightened around the phone. I'm not a current practitioner. You're retired. You know what I mean. His voice took on that edge of impatience I remembered from his teenage years, when my expectations exceeded his achievements. These people are looking for cutting-edge cardiac care, 3D mapping, robotic-assisted procedures, AI-driven diagnostics. Not, he trailed off. Not what? I asked quietly. Not stories about open-heart surgeries from the 1990s. Not techniques that have been obsolete for a decade. He paused. Dad, I say this with love, but you represent the old guard. I'm trying to build something new here. The words hit with the precision of a scalpel. Clean, efficient, devastating. I looked around my study at the walls lined with commendations from Johns Hopkins, from the American College of Cardiology, from 35 years of saving lives. The photo of Margaret and me at my retirement dinner, her smile bright, despite the cancer that would take her 6 months later. The shelf holding my published research papers, 43 peer-reviewed articles that had advanced cardiac surgery by increments David would never appreciate. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Well, I wouldn't want to embarrass you with my obsolete techniques. Dad, don't be dramatic. We'll do dinner another time, just the three of us. Somewhere quiet, where his colleagues wouldn't see him with the father who'd paid for his medical school, his residency expenses, his first year of malpractice insurance, the father who'd given him $600,000 to open the Heart Cardiovascular Institute 2 years ago. David, about that loan, I have to go, Dad. Patient consult. We'll talk soon. The line went dead before I could finish. I sat in the leather chair Margaret had given me for our 30th anniversary, the one she'd saved for months to buy, and stared at the phone in my hand. The tremor was back, not the one David had probably told people about, the sign of my declining skills, but the real one, the tremor of fury held in check by surgical discipline. The memories came unbidden, sharp as the beaver blade I'd used for sternotomies. David at 6, watching me scrub in through the OR observation window, his eyes wide with hero worship. David at 16, telling his guidance counselor he wanted to be, just like my dad, the best cardiac surgeon in Baltimore. David at 28, matching into Johns Hopkins Cardiology Fellowship, calling me first with the news, his voice breaking with joy that David was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. My phone buzzed with a text message. David's wife, Sophia. William, David told me about the call. I hope you understand. This is really a business event. We need to project a certain image. Perhaps we can do a family dinner in January? I stared at the message, at the casual dismissal wrapped in false consideration. Project a certain image. And apparently, a 66-year-old retired surgeon didn't fit that image, despite having trained half the cardiothoracic surgeons currently practicing in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing into a search bar I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Heart Cardiovascular Institute reviews. What I found made my blood pressure spike in ways my cardiologist would disapprove of. 3 patient complaints filed with the Washington State Medical Board in the past 6 months. Nothing serious enough to trigger an investigation, but concerning. Allegations of unnecessary procedures, aggressive upselling of elective treatments, billing irregularities. Each complaint had been dismissed or withdrawn, probably settled quietly with NDAS and checks. But it was the pattern that caught my attention. The trained eye that had diagnosed thousands of cardiac conditions over 3 decades saw what regulators had missed. David was churning patients, bringing them in for basic consultations and converting them to expensive interventional procedures at rates that exceeded statistical norms by 40%. I knew that pattern. I'd seen it in residents who cared more about their surgical numbers than their patient outcomes. I'd written recommendation letters that ended careers for less egregious behavior. My son was practicing bad medicine, and he was doing it in a clinic I'd funded. The doorbell rang at 6:23 p.m., pulling me from the rabbit hole of medical reviews and billing records I'd been excavating. I opened the door to find a UPS delivery, a large box, expensive wrapping, David's return address. Inside, a note in Sophia's handwriting. William, we wanted to send you something special for the holidays, since you won't be joining us at the clinic celebration. Enjoy, David and Sophia. Beneath the tissue paper, a bathrobe. Plush, expensive, with Johns Hopkins alumni embroidered on the breast. The kind of gift you give someone who spends their days shuffling around in slippers, watching daytime television, slowly fading into irrelevance. I set it aside and pulled out the second item, a book titled The Art of Graceful Retirement, Finding Purpose After Your Career. Ends. The message was clear. You're done, you're old. Accept it gracefully and stay out of our way. I carried the box to my garage and dropped it in the recycling bin, then returned to my study. Margaret's photograph watched me from the bookshelf, her eyes holding that mixture of love and exasperation she'd perfected over 41 years of marriage. I know what you're thinking, I said to the photo, that I pushed him too hard, that I measured his worth in achievements instead of character. My voice cracked. You were right, Margaret. You were always right, and now I'm reaping what I sowed. But even as I said it, I knew there was more to this than my parenting failures. David hadn't just rejected my old-fashioned methods. He'd become something worse, a doctor who saw patients as revenue streams, who built his success on my reputation while actively destroying what I'd spent a lifetime building. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I found myself in my home office, pulling out boxes I hadn't opened since Margaret's death. Financial records, the loan documents for David's clinic, $600,000, transferred in 3 installments over 18 months, each one depleting the retirement fund Margaret and I had carefully built over 40 years. The loan agreement was simple. David would repay the principal over 10 years at 3% interest. Monthly payments of $5,800. He'd made exactly 4 payments before the excuses started. Cash flow issues. Waiting on insurance reimbursements. Reinvesting in new equipment. I'd stopped asking after Margaret died. What was the point? She was gone, the money was gone, and all I wanted was a relationship with my son. But at 2:47 a.m., sitting in the dark with a calculator and a growing sense of betrayal, I added up the numbers. $600,000 principal, minus $23,200 in payments, plus accumulated interest. David owed me $601,487, more than $500,000, and he couldn't spare a seat for me at his Christmas party. The sun rose on December 4th, finding me still at my desk, still calculating. Not just money anymore, but something more valuable. Leverage. I pulled up David's clinic website. Sleek, modern, full of buzzwords about innovative cardiac care and patient-centered excellence. The staff page showed 8 physicians, 12 nurses, 4 administrative staff. Monthly overhead had to be running $300,000 minimum, probably closer to $400,000 with the downtown Seattle rent, and the high-end equipment David had insisted was essential for competing with University of Washington Medical Center. Cash flow would be tight. Any disruption, a lawsuit, a licensing investigation, negative publicity, could collapse the whole operation within months. My phone rang at 8:15 a.m. David's number. "Dad, I wanted to apologize if I came across harsh yesterday." Sophia said I should have been more diplomatic. Did she? I kept my voice neutral, clinical, the tone I'd used when delivering terminal diagnoses. "Yeah. Look, the Christmas party is what it is, but let's definitely do that dinner in January. Maybe we can talk about, well, about some financial matters." There it was, the real reason for the call. David needed money again. "What kind of financial matters?" I asked, already knowing. "The clinic's expansion plans. We're looking at opening a second location in Bellevue, maybe bringing in some partners, but the build-out costs are significant. I was hoping we could discuss an additional investment. Nothing major, maybe $200,000 to get us through the initial phase." "And the $601,487 you already owe me?" Silence. Then carefully, "That's part of what I wanted to discuss. Maybe we could roll that into the new investment, restructure everything as equity rather than debt. You'd actually own part of the clinic, Dad. Wouldn't that be better?" I could hear Sophia coaching him in the background, her voice a whisper punctuated by his agreeable murmurs. "Let me think about it," I said. "Great. I mean, take your time. No pressure. But Dad, one more thing." His voice dropped. "I've been hearing some concerns from colleagues. About about whether you're doing okay. Some people have mentioned seeing you at medical conferences asking questions that seem a bit confused, out of date with current protocols." My hand clenched the phone so hard I heard the case creak. "Is that so? I'm just concerned about you." Maybe it's time to step back from the professional community. Focus on enjoying retirement. There's no shame in it, Dad. You had a great career. But things change. Medicine changes. And sometimes it's hard for the older generation to keep up. The careful construction of it took my breath away. He wasn't just excluding me from his Christmas party. He was building a narrative. The declining father, the confused retiree, the once great surgeon who didn't know when to quit. He was destroying my reputation to protect his own. "I'll think about everything you said," I told him, my voice deadly calm. "And David, you should know that I'm feeling sharper than I have in years. Retirement has given me time to really focus, to pay attention to details I might have missed when I was busy saving lives." "That's good, Dad. That's really good." He sounded uncertain now, the confidence wavering. "We'll talk soon," I said out and ended the call. I sat in my study, watching the December rain streak down the windows, and made a decision that had been building since that first dismissive phone call. My son thought I was obsolete, confused, ready to be managed and controlled. He thought wrong. I pulled out my contact list and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 18 months. Patricia Lawson, the woman whose life I'd saved 30 years ago, when she was 27, and her congenital heart defect was scheduled to kill her before she turned 30. I'd performed a complex valve replacement and repair pro bono because she had no insurance and nowhere else to turn. She'd sent me a Christmas card every year since, each one thanking me for giving her a life she'd never expected to have. The most recent card, still sitting on my desk, had a new title beneath her signature: Chair, Washington State Medical Quality Assurance Commission. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Dr. Hart?" Her voice was warm, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Patricia, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I need your advice on a medical ethics matter." "Of course. Anything. What's going on?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to set in motion. 35 years of surgical precision had taught me one fundamental truth: the cleanest cuts heal best. Time to stop hesitating and start operating. "It's about my son's practice," I said. "I think there are some serious problems, and I think patients are being hurt." Patricia Lawson's voice shifted from warm to professional in seconds. She asked me to send everything I had: patient complaints, billing irregularities, any documentation that supported my concerns. I spent the next 3 days compiling a dossier that would have impressed the FDA. But it was what happened on December 8th that transformed concern into cold certainty. I'd driven to Seattle for the annual Pacific Northwest Cardiac Conference, an event I'd attended for 28 consecutive years. The organizers had invited me to moderate a panel on surgical complications. Recognition that my expertise still mattered, regardless of what my son thought. I arrived early, stopping by the registration desk to pick up my badge. The young woman behind the table scanned her list, frowned, then scanned again. "I'm sorry, Dr. Hart, but I'm not seeing your registration." "That's impossible. I confirmed 3 weeks ago. I'm moderating the complications panel." She clicked through her computer, her frown deepening. "Sir, it shows here that your registration was canceled on December 5th. There's a note that Dr. David Hart called to say you were unable to attend due to health concerns." The words hit like a failed defibrillation. "Health concerns?" "Yes, sir. The note says you've been experiencing some cognitive difficulties, and your family felt it was best if you didn't participate this year." Her voice dropped with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything we can do to help?" I stood there, frozen, as the full scope of David's strategy crystallized. He wasn't just excluding me from his Christmas party. He was systematically erasing me from the medical community, painting me as incompetent, spreading lies about my mental state to anyone who would listen. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "A serious mistake. Who can I speak with about this?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the conference director's office, listening to Dr. Raymond Chen explain how concerned David had sounded when he called to cancel my registration, how he'd mentioned my trembling hands, my memory lapses, my confusion about current protocols, how he'd done it all with such reluctance, such filial concern that no one thought to question it. "He said you'd be embarrassed if anyone confronted you directly," Dr. Chen said, clearly uncomfortable, "that the family was trying to help you transition into retirement gracefully. William, if you're having difficulties, we have resources." "I'm not having difficulties," I interrupted. "My son is lying to damage my reputation, and I'd like to know who else he's contacted with these fabrications." Dr. Chen's expression shifted from sympathy to alarm. He pulled up a file on his computer, clicking through emails with visible reluctance. He contacted the American College of Cardiology, the Washington State Medical Association, and the Johns Hopkins Alumni Network, all within the past 2 weeks. My carefully maintained composure cracked. David hadn't just attacked me. He'd launched a coordinated campaign to destroy my professional legacy. Every organization I'd belonged to for decades, poisoned against me by lies wrapped in concern. What exactly did he tell them? Dr. Chen turned his monitor toward me. The emails were masterpieces of subtle character assassination. David never said anything directly actionable, just expressed worry about his father's declining health, suggested that perhaps I shouldn't be in positions of authority, mentioned incidents that never happened, but sounded plausible enough that no one questioned them. The most recent email, sent 2 days ago, suggested that my participation in any medical conferences or panels might create liability concerns and reputational risks for the hosting organizations. I read every word with the focus I'd once used to review preoperative scans, memorizing the details, cataloging the lies. When I finished, I looked at Dr. Chen with the same intensity I'd used in the OR, when things went sideways and every second mattered. Raymond, I've known you for 15 years. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my mental capacity? He shook his head slowly. No, never. But William, this is your son making these claims. Why would he? That's exactly what I intend to find out. I stood, straightening my suit jacket. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd reinstate my conference registration and my panel participation. I assure you, my cognitive function is excellent, and I have documentation from my physician to prove it. Of course. William, I'm sorry we didn't verify this more carefully. You trusted a son's concern for his father. That's not something to apologize for. I paused at the door. But Raymond, when the truth comes out about why David really made those calls, I'll expect the conference to make a public correction. My reputation took 35 years to build. I won't let it be destroyed by a few strategic emails. The conference went well. My panel was standing room only, and my contributions were sharp enough that 3 colleagues pulled me aside afterward to say they'd heard rumors of my decline. But clearly, those rumors were false. I thanked them and filed away their names for later. But it was during the reception that evening that everything accelerated beyond control. I was discussing a complex case study with Dr. Sarah Mitchell from University of Washington when I saw them. David and Sophia, dressed like they were attending the Oscars rather than a medical conference, working the room with practiced precision. They hadn't seen me yet, positioned as I was behind a pillar near the bar. I watched my son operate, saw how he introduced himself, not as Dr. David Hart, but as Dr. Hart, founder of the Heart Cardiovascular Institute. Saw how Sophia touched arms and laughed at jokes, how she steered conversation toward their clinic's success and innovative approaches. They were hunting, I realized, hunting for investors, for referral sources, for anything that would elevate their status. Then I heard my name. A surgeon from Oregon was asking David about me, mentioning he'd heard I was moderating a panel, and was surprised given the health issues David had reported. This was my chance to hear what my son would say when he thought I wasn't listening. David's expression shifted to perfect concern, the mask of a devoted son worried about his aging father. His voice dropped just enough to sound confidential without seeming gossipy. He explained that I was in denial about my declining abilities, that I'd tried to perform a consultation recently and had confused basic anatomical terminology, that the family was trying to intervene gently, but I was resistant. It's heartbreaking, David said, his voice heavy with false emotion. My mother died just before his decline really accelerated. I think the grief broke something in him, but he won't admit he needs help. Sophia touched his arm supportively, adding her own observations about how I'd become fixated on their clinic, making inappropriate demands for financial information, suggesting I might be developing paranoia along with the cognitive decline. They were building a narrative. If I challenged them, if I demanded my loan repayment, or questioned their medical practices, they could point to these conversations and say, "See? Paranoia, confusion, an old man unable to accept his limitations. It was brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way." I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked directly toward them. David saw me first, his face going pale. Sophia's perfectly painted smile froze. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said to the group, my voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in the OR. I couldn't help but overhear my son's concern for my health. "David, I appreciate your worry, but I think there's been some confusion." The circle of physicians went silent, suddenly aware they were witnessing a family drama they wanted no part of. "Dad, I didn't know you were here," David started. "Clearly. Otherwise, you might have told these good people that I just moderated a panel on surgical complications to a packed room, or that I've recently published 2 peer-reviewed articles in the Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery, or that my annual physical 2 weeks ago showed cognitive function in the 95th percentile for my age group." I smiled, the expression sharp as a scalpel. "But perhaps those details slipped your mind." Sophia recovered first, her voice smooth as silk sutures. "William, no one's questioning your past accomplishments. We're just concerned about your current state. The incident at the clinic last month." "What incident?" I asked pleasantly. "Please enlighten me. I haven't been to your clinic in over a year." She faltered, caught in a lie she couldn't back out of. David jumped in, his voice harder now, defensive. "Dad, this isn't the place for this conversation." "I agree. This is a professional conference where you've been spreading false information about my mental health to damage my reputation. Hardly the place for family matters." I turned to the Oregon surgeon. "Dr. Patterson, I believe you asked about my health. I'm in excellent condition, as my physician will attest. If you'd like documentation, I'm happy to provide it." The group dispersed quickly after that, physicians suddenly remembering other conversations they needed to have, other people they needed to see. Only David, Sophia, and I remained, the space around us suddenly vast and hostile. "You just embarrassed us in front of potential investors," David hissed, dropping the concerned son act entirely. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I corrected lies you were spreading about me. If that embarrasses you, perhaps you should stop lying." Sophia's mask cracked, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Listen to me, you arrogant old man. David has built something real here, something important. We're not going to let you destroy it, because you can't accept that your time is over." "My time isn't over. But it seems your husband's ethics died before they had a chance to develop." Her hand shot out, pointing at me like a weapon. "We know about your little investigation. Patricia Lawson called to inform us that you'd filed a complaint with the Medical Quality Assurance Commission. What kind of father tries to destroy his own son's career? The kind who took an oath to do no harm. Something David seems to have forgotten." I looked at my son, at the stranger wearing my legacy like a stolen coat. "You're practicing bad medicine, David. Churning patients, performing unnecessary procedures, billing fraudulently. I have the documentation, and I'm not going to stand by and watch you hurt people to fund your lifestyle." David's face went from pale to red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're stuck in the past with your outdated techniques and your superiority complex. Medicine has evolved, Dad. Just because you can't understand modern protocols doesn't mean they're wrong. I understand fraudulent billing perfectly well. It looked the same 30 years ago as it does now." Sophia stepped between us, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about how you manipulated David into that loan. How you used your wife's death to guilt him into taking your money. Margaret would be ashamed of what you're doing right now." The mention of Margaret's name from this woman's mouth hit harder than any scalpel. My hands clenched at my sides, the tremor real now, fueled by rage. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't you dare speak about my wife." "Why not?" Everyone knows she was miserable, married to a man who cared more about his surgical record than his family. David told me how you missed his graduations, his birthday parties, every important moment because you were always at the hospital. Margaret died alone in a hospice room while you were in surgery. Did you know that? That's the last thing David told her. That you couldn't even be bothered to be there when she needed you most? The words detonated in my chest. I'd known Margaret died while I was in the OR. It had been an emergency case, a 15-year-old boy with an aortic dissection. I'd made the choice every surgeon dreads: stay with the family member who's dying or save the patient who might live. I'd saved the boy, and I'd lost my wife. David had been there. He'd held Margaret's hand. He'd told me later that her last words were, "Tell William I understand. Tell him to save that boy." But standing here, watching my son let his wife weaponize Margaret's death against me, I realized he'd lied, either about what Margaret said or about his forgiveness, or about everything. The son I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone capable of using his mother's death as ammunition. "We're done here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," David said, "we're not done." "You think you can file complaints and make accusations and face no consequences? I have friends too, Dad. Friends on hospital boards. Friends at Johns Hopkins who remember how difficult you were. How many residents you made cry. How many nurses complained about your temper. You want to go to war? Fine. But I promise you'll lose more than I will." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw no trace of the boy who'd once admired me, only a man willing to destroy anything that threatened his carefully constructed image. "You're absolutely right about one thing," I said. "I was a difficult surgeon. I demanded excellence. I pushed hard. And you know what? Every single one of those residents who cried in my OR became exceptional surgeons. Every nurse who complained about my standards learned what real patient care looked like." I stepped closer. "But you, David, you didn't learn excellence. You learned how to fake it, and that's so much worse." I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes burning into my back. Behind me, I heard Sophia's voice, sharp and triumphant. "He's losing it." "Did you see his hands shaking? Get it documented. We'll need it for the competency hearing." Competency hearing. They weren't just trying to damage my reputation. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, to take control of my assets, my estate, everything I'd built. I made it to my car before the shaking got so bad I had to sit in the parking garage for 20 minutes, breathing through the rage and the grief and the devastating realization that my son wasn't just willing to destroy me, he was actively planning it. My phone rang. "Patricia Lawson. William, we need to meet. Tomorrow. I found something in your son's practice records that you need to see. It's worse than we thought." I started the engine, hands steady now, mind clearing with the focus that only comes in true emergencies. "How much worse?" "Bring your lawyer," she said. "You're going to need one." Patricia Lawson's office at the Medical Quality Assurance Commission was sterile and clinical, much like the operating rooms where I'd spent most of my adult life. She spread documents across the conference table with the care of someone handling contaminated instruments. "William, I need you to understand what you're looking at before we proceed." Her voice carried the weight of 30 years in medical oversight. "Your son's clinic has been billing Medicare for procedures that were never performed. Cardiac catheterizations coded as high complexity when the records show they were routine. Stent placements billed to patients who had clean angiograms. I studied the documents, my surgical training allowing me to spot the discrepancies immediately. Patient admitted for chest pain, sent home after basic workup. Bill submitted, $47,000 for emergency stent placement. Another patient, routine stress test. Bill submitted, $63,000 for cardiac catheterization with intervention. How many cases?" I asked. "So far? 47 over 18 months. Potentially $2.3 million in fraudulent billing." She pulled out another file. "But that's not the worst part. 3 patients suffered complications from procedures they didn't need. 1 died. The room tilted." "Died?" "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 72, came in for a consultation about mild angina. David performed a cardiac catheterization that lacerated her femoral artery. She bled out during the repair attempt. Patricia's expression was granite. The family settled quietly. $800,000. NDA included. I sat back, the reality settling over me like a surgical drape. My son hadn't just committed fraud. He'd killed someone through unnecessary intervention, and he'd covered it up. Why wasn't this reported to the medical board? It was coded as a procedural complication. Happens in cardiac cath labs. Without someone looking at the pattern, it appeared isolated. She leaned forward. William, I can't open a formal investigation based solely on your complaint. There's a conflict of interest, but I can refer this to the State Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. They have subpoena power. Do it. Once I make that referral, there's no stopping it. This will destroy David's career, his marriage, everything he's built. She paused. He's your son. I looked at Margaret's photo on my phone screen, at her last smile before the cancer took her. He stopped being my son when he decided to hurt people for profit. Make the referral. 2 days later, David showed up at my door. It was 6 a.m., and he wasn't alone. Sophia stood beside him, along with a man in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. Dad, we need to talk. David's voice carried forced calm. Can we come in? I stepped aside, noting how they moved through my home like invaders assessing territory. The suited man introduced himself as Trevor Ashford, attorney specializing in elder law. Dr. Hart, Trevor began, his voice professionally sympathetic, your son has expressed serious concerns about your welfare. Living alone at your age, making erratic accusations against family members, showing signs of paranoia and confusion. I'm not confused, I interrupted. With respect, that's often what people experiencing cognitive decline believe. He pulled documents from his briefcase. We'd like to discuss arranging for a comprehensive evaluation. Perhaps assisted living where you'd have support? You want to have me declared incompetent? I looked at David. Is that what this is? My son couldn't meet my eyes. Sophia answered for him. We want you to get help. You've been making wild accusations, filing false complaints with medical boards, harassing David's colleagues. This isn't normal behavior, William. Neither is Medicare fraud. Trevor's expression didn't change. Dr. Hart, I advise you to be very careful about making such statements. Defamation of character is a serious legal matter. My clients are prepared to seek a protective order if these baseless attacks continue. I stood slowly, letting my hands shake, letting my posture slump. The role I'd been planning since Patricia's call. I'm tired, I said, my voice wavering. I think you should leave. David's expression shifted, something that might have been concern or might have been satisfaction. Dad, are you okay? You look... I said leave. I moved toward the door, my gait unsteady, one hand gripping furniture for support, the performance of a lifetime. Just leave me alone. After they left, I stood at my window and watched them confer in the driveway, David gesturing animatedly, Sophia pulling out her phone to record notes, Trevor nodding with professional satisfaction. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd seen confirmation of my decline. I pulled out my own phone and checked the recording app I'd activated before answering the door. Every word captured, every threat, every attempt to paint me as incompetent. My lawyer, Martin Reese, called an hour later. I'd sent him the recording. His response was immediate and professionally vicious. William, this is gold. They just committed elder abuse on tape. Threatened you with forced institutionalization. I can have a restraining order filed by the end of business today. Not yet, I said. Let them think they're winning. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the part perfectly. I showed up at a medical society luncheon and asked confused questions about procedures I'd performed 1,000 times. I called David's clinic repeatedly, leaving rambling voicemails about the loan. I sent emails with obvious spelling errors and disorganized thoughts. Every confused moment was calculated. Every rambling message was scripted. I was building a narrative that David and Sophia would believe completely. The declining father, the tragic deterioration, the family burden that justified their actions. Meanwhile, Patricia worked quietly with the Attorney General's office. Subpoenas were issued, records seized, patients interviewed. The investigation was invisible but thorough, moving through David's practice like a surgical dissection, layer by layer, exposing the rot beneath. On December 23rd, David called, his voice heavy with false concern. "Dad, I think we need to talk about getting you some help." Real help. Trevor found an excellent facility in Tacoma. Memory care, skilled nursing, everything you'd need. "I don't need a facility." "Dad, you called my clinic 8 times yesterday. You don't remember, do you?" The pity in his voice was perfect, practiced. "You're not well? Let us help you." I let the silence stretch. Let him hear the defeat he expected. "Maybe you're right," I said finally, my voice small. "Maybe I'm not well." "That's good, Dad. That's really good. We'll come by tomorrow, help you pack some things." "No," I interrupted, finding sudden steel. "Not yet. I want one more Christmas in my own home, with Margaret's things, our memories, just one more." David sighed, the sound of someone indulging a difficult patient. "Okay, one more Christmas. But Dad, after the holidays, we're doing this. For your own good." "For my own good?" I repeated, and hung up. That night, I received an email from Patricia with 2 attachments. The first was a formal notice. The Washington State Medical Quality Assurance Commission had voted to open a full investigation into Heart Cardiovascular Institute. The second was a sealed indictment from the Attorney General's office, scheduled to be unsealed January 4th. Federal charges: Medicare fraud, mail fraud, and involuntary manslaughter. I forwarded both documents to Martin Rees with a single line: "Time to stop shaking." Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. I was drinking coffee when my doorbell rang. David stood there alone. No Sophia, no lawyer, just my son holding a small wrapped box. "Merry Christmas, Dad." He stepped inside without invitation. "I know things have been difficult. I wanted to give you this before everything changes." I took the box but didn't open it. "Everything changes?" "After the holidays, the facility, getting you proper care." He looked around my home, at Margaret's photos, at my career memorabilia. "We'll need to sell the house, settle your affairs. Trevor says it's better to do it while you can still participate in the decisions." "How considerate." "Dad, I'm trying to help you." "Why can't you see that?" His voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion or excellent acting. "I'm your son. I love you, even when you make it so damn difficult." I looked at him, at this stranger wearing my legacy, and made my decision. "Open your gift, David. I got you something too." He seemed surprised. "You did?" I walked to my desk and pulled out an envelope. Inside, copies of everything: the fraudulent billing records, Patricia's investigation notes, the sealed indictment, and one more document, my loan agreement, now transferred to a collections agency with full authorization to seize assets. David's face went from confusion to pale recognition as he read. His hands started to shake. Real tremors, not the performance I'd been giving. "This is—" he started, then stopped. "This isn't real. You can't— It's all real. The investigation, the indictment, the loan default, everything." I kept my voice surgical, precise. "In 10 days, federal agents will execute search warrants on your clinic. In 30 days, your medical license will be suspended pending investigation. In 60 days, you'll likely be indicted for manslaughter. You did this." His voice was barely a whisper. "You destroyed me." "No, David. You destroyed yourself. I just documented it." I paused. "And by the way, every confused phone call, every rambling email, every moment you thought confirmed my decline, all performance, all recorded, all evidence of your attempt to have me declared incompetent to cover your crimes." The color drained completely from his face. "I'm your son. You were my son. Now you're just another doctor who forgot his oath." I walked to the door and opened it. Merry Christmas, David. Enjoy it. It's the last one you'll spend as a licensed physician. He left without another word, the envelope clutched in his shaking hands. Through the window, I watched him sit in his car for 10 minutes, reading and rereading the documents, understanding finally that every move he'd made had been countered, every attack documented, every assumption about his declining father completely wrong. I poured myself another coffee and opened the gift he'd brought. Inside, a card. To Dad, with love and hope for better days ahead. David. Beneath the card, a brochure for a Tacoma Memory Care Center and a power of attorney document, already prepared, waiting for my signature. I threw them both in the fireplace and watched them burn. The federal raid happened at 6:47 a.m. on January 4th. I wasn't there to see it, but Patricia called me with details. 8 FBI agents, 4 state investigators, 2 U.S. Marshals. They'd seized computers, patient files, billing records, everything. David's staff watched in shock as boxes were loaded into unmarked vans. By 9 a.m., the local news had the story. Prominent Seattle cardiologist under federal investigation for Medicare fraud. By noon, it was statewide. By evening, CNN picked it up with a new angle. Doctor accused of killing patient through unnecessary procedure. My phone rang constantly. Former colleagues wanting to know if I'd heard. Medical society members asking if the allegations were true. 3 reporters requesting interviews about my son, the fraudster. My son, the killer. My son who'd tried to have his own father declared incompetent to hide his crimes. I declined them all. This wasn't about revenge or publicity. This was about stopping a doctor who'd forgotten that patients were people, not profit centers. David called at 10:23 p.m., his voice raw. They took everything. The computers, the files, my personal phone. Dad, they're talking about criminal charges, prison. I know. You did this. You destroyed my life. No, David. I documented your crimes. There's a difference. I paused. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Do you even remember her name? Silence. The 72-year-old woman you killed with an unnecessary catheterization? She had 3 grandchildren. She was planning to retire to Arizona. You took that from her because you wanted to bill Medicare $63,000. It was a complication. These things happen. Not to patients who don't need the procedure in the first place. My voice stayed surgical, precise. You performed 47 unnecessary interventions in 18 months. How many other complications did you bury? How many other families did you pay off? I was building something, he said, desperation bleeding through. The clinic, the reputation, the legacy. I was trying to be... To be what? Better than me? I laughed, the sound bitter. You wanted to escape my shadow so badly that you became everything I despise. Congratulations, David. You succeeded spectacularly. He hung up. I sat in the darkness of my study, feeling no triumph, only the hollow ache of a father watching his son self-destruct. The Washington State Medical Quality Assurance Commission moved faster than I'd expected. On January 11th, they issued an emergency suspension of David's medical license. The press release was clinical and devastating. Immediate suspension pending investigation into patient care irregularities and billing fraud. Heart Cardiovascular Institute closed its doors that afternoon. 8 physicians out of work, 12 nurses, 4 administrative staff. Patients scrambled to find new cardiologists. Scheduled procedures canceled. Months of medical care disrupted. I felt the weight of those consequences. Good people losing jobs because of David's greed. Patients suffering because of his fraud. The collateral damage was enormous, but Mrs. Eleanor Vance was still dead. On January 15th, the Seattle Times published a feature investigation. They'd interviewed 6 patients who'd undergone unnecessary procedures at David's clinic. One woman described how she'd come in for a routine consultation and left with 3 stents she didn't need and $89,000 in medical debt. A man talked about complications from an unnecessary pacemaker that had nearly killed him. The article mentioned me briefly. Dr. William Hart, the defendant's father and a retired Johns Hopkins cardiac surgeon, reportedly first raised concerns about his son's practices last December. That evening, Sophia showed up at my door. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup imperfect. The polish had cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "You destroyed him," she said without preamble. "David hasn't slept in days. He won't eat. He just sits in the dark, talking about prison and losing everything." Her voice rose. "Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" "I wanted him to stop hurting patients." "Patience." She spat the word. "Do you know what your righteous crusade cost?" 22 people lost their jobs. Families with mortgages, kids in college. David built something real, something important. Built on fraud and dead patients. One patient died, one complication out of thousands of procedures. One unnecessary death, I corrected, and 47 fraudulent procedures, and $2.3 million in false billing. Should I continue? Her face twisted with rage. David idolized you. Everything he did was to prove he was worthy of being your son, and you destroyed him for it. No, I said quietly. I destroyed the lie he was living. The real David, the one who actually cared about patients and medicine, died long before I filed that first complaint. I just made the death official. She left without another word. Through the window, I watched her drive away, her BMW jerking and weaving like she couldn't see through her tears. The formal indictment came down on January 22nd. 17 counts. Medicare fraud, mail fraud, involuntary manslaughter, conspiracy to defraud the United States. David's arraignment was scheduled for February 3rd. His bail was set at $500,000. He didn't call me for help. Instead, I received a letter from Trevor Ashford, the elder law attorney. It informed me that David was filing a civil suit against me for $3.2 million. Defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and elder abuse. Elder abuse. The irony was almost funny. Martin Rees laughed when I showed him. "This is desperate nonsense. We have recordings of them threatening you. Documentation of their attempt to have you institutionalized. They'll get laughed out of court." "Will they?" "William, juries don't sympathize with doctors who kill patients and then try to silence their fathers. This lawsuit is suicide." He paused. "Though I suspect that's not really the point." "What is the point?" "David's trying to control the narrative, paint himself as the victim of a vindictive father. It might not win in court, but in the court of public opinion?" Martin shrugged. "It's his only play." The next week, I started seeing the media strategy. David's attorney gave interviews painting him as a dedicated physician, targeted by an aging father, unable to accept his son's success. Sophia went on a local morning show, tearful and sympathetic, talking about the family tragedy of dementia and false accusations. They were good, almost believable. Then Patricia Lawson went public. She gave an interview to the medical ethics podcast, First, Do No Harm, laying out the investigation in careful detail. The evidence, the dead patient, the pattern of fraud. She mentioned me only briefly, but with devastating clarity. Dr. William Hart brought these concerns to our attention because he took his oath seriously, even when it meant investigating his own son. The narrative shifted overnight. David wasn't the victim. He was the perpetrator, and I wasn't a senile father. I was a doctor who'd chosen patience over family. On February 2nd, the day before David's arraignment, he finally called. "I'm not asking for money," he said immediately. "I know you won't help. I'm calling because." He paused, and I heard something break in his voice. "I'm calling to say you were right." About everything. I said nothing. The procedures, the billing, the way I treated patients like numbers. "You were right." He took a shaking breath. "Mom would be ashamed of what I became." "I'm ashamed of what I became." "Then why did you do it?" I asked quietly. Because I wanted to be more than your son. I wanted to be William Hart's successor and my own man at the same time, and I thought money and success would prove I'd made it. He laughed bitterly. Instead, I proved I'd learned nothing from you except ambition. The ambition was always there, David. I just taught you to channel it into surgery. You chose to channel it into fraud. I know. Silence stretched between us. Tomorrow, when I stand in front of that judge, I'm going to plead guilty. My attorney says I'll get 8 to 10 years, maybe less with cooperation. Another pause. I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For what I said about Mom. For trying to have you declared incompetent. For forgetting that medicine is supposed to be about healing. Sorry doesn't bring Mrs. Vance back. I know. Nothing brings her back. I'll live with that for the rest of my life. His voice dropped to a whisper. I just wanted you to know that even though I'm angry, even though part of me hates you for this, another part knows you did exactly what a doctor should do. You protected patients, even from your own son. He hung up before I could respond. The arraignment was brief. David pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. 8 years in federal prison. Medical license permanently revoked. $2.3 million in restitution. I didn't attend. But I watched the news coverage that evening, seeing my son in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his head down. The brilliant cardiologist was gone. Only the criminal remained. Patricia called after the broadcast. You did the right thing, William. Then why does it feel like I lost everything? Because you did, she said gently. You lost your son. But you saved future patients from the same fate as Eleanor Vance. Sometimes the right thing costs everything. I hung up and sat in the darkness, wondering if Margaret would agree, wondering if choosing patients over family made me a good doctor or a bad father. Maybe both. Maybe that was the price of the oath we'd taken. First, do no harm, even when harm wears your son's face. 6 months later, I found myself driving to Federal Correctional Institution SeaTac on a Thursday afternoon. The visiting request form had arrived 3 weeks earlier, David's handwriting barely legible. Dad, if you're willing, I'd like to see you. No expectations, just a conversation. David. I'd left it sitting on my desk for 2 weeks before finally checking the approved box. The visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and resignation. David appeared thinner, older, wearing prison khakis that hung loose on his frame. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or relief that I'd actually come. We sat across from each other, the table between us feeling like an operating table. Sterile, clinical, the barrier between life and death. Thanks for coming, he said finally. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. I've had a lot of time to think in here. About everything. He looked at his hands, the same hands I'd taught to tie surgical knots. My therapist says I spent my whole life trying to be you, then spent the last 5 years trying to prove I wasn't you. Either way, I was never just myself. And who is that? I asked quietly. I don't know yet, but I'm learning. He met my eyes. I've been working in the prison medical clinic. Basic first aid, medication distribution, nothing glamorous. Yesterday, an inmate came in with chest pain. Probably just anxiety, but I checked him out thoroughly, made sure he was okay, how his voice caught. And for the first time in years, I felt like a doctor again. Not a businessman, not your son, just a doctor. I felt something crack in my chest. The armor I'd built since Christmas morning finally giving way. That's good, David. That's really good. I read Mom's journals, he continued, the ones you gave me after she died. I never actually read them before. Tears welled in his eyes. She wrote about you, about how you missed birthday parties and school plays because you were saving someone's life. And she said she never resented it because she understood the weight of that oath. My own eyes burned. She did understand. Better than I deserved. She also wrote about her fears that I'd learn your ambition without learning your integrity, that I'd want the recognition without doing the work. He wiped his eyes roughly. She saw it coming, Dad, and neither of us listened. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of mistakes neither of us could undo. I failed you, I said finally, as a father. I taught you to be a surgeon, but I never taught you to be a man. I measured your worth in achievements and wonder why you did the same with your patients. Dad, no, let me finish. I leaned forward. I was so busy being Dr. William Hart, the cardiac surgeon, that I forgot to be your father. Margaret tried to tell me. She'd say, he needs you at his games, not in the OR. But I always thought surgery was more important, that saving strangers mattered more than being present for my son. You saved lives and lost you in the process. I paused, the truth of it settling like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding. You didn't become corrupt in a vacuum, David. You learned from me that work matters more than people. I just never imagined you'd apply that lesson to your patients. David was crying openly now. I killed someone, Dad. Mrs. Vance. I killed her because I wanted to bill Medicare for a procedure that would boost my quarterly numbers. I know. And you still came here, after everything I did to you, after I tried to have you declared incompetent and steal your house, after I weaponized Mom's death against you. You still came. I reached across the table, breaking the prison's no-contact rule, and gripped his hand. The guard shifted but didn't intervene. Because you're my son, and because I finally understand what Margaret tried to teach me. Being right isn't the same as being good. I was right to report you, right to stop you from hurting more patients. But I wasn't good. A good father would have seen this coming years ago and intervened before Mrs. Vance died. That's not your fault. It's not all my fault, I corrected. But it's not none of my fault either. I created the environment that made you think success mattered more than integrity. And then I punished you for learning that lesson too well. We sat there, father and son, both crying in a prison visiting room, finally honest about the ways we'd failed each other. 8 years is a long time, David said eventually. When I get out, I'll be 43, too old to restart a medical career, even if they'd let me, which they won't. So you'll do something else, something meaningful. I squeezed his hand. You're not defined by your worst mistake, David. You're defined by what you do next. What if I can't fix this? What if I'm just broken? I thought about Margaret, about the 41 years we'd had together, about all the moments I'd missed chasing surgical excellence. Then you start by admitting you're broken. Then you do the work to heal. It's what we tell patients after every surgery. Recovery takes time and it hurts, but it's possible. He nodded slowly. Will you come back? To visit? Every month, I promised, if you want me to. I want that. He paused. Dad, Sophia filed for divorce last week. Said she couldn't be married to a convict. Her parents convinced her I'd ruin her career. I'm sorry. I'm not. She was never my partner. She was my co-conspirator. He smiled grimly. Turns out when you build a relationship on ambition and image, there's nothing left when those things disappear. The guard called time. We stood and David hesitated before asking, Do you think Mom would forgive me? For what I became? I looked at my son, at the man he was trying to become, and knew the answer Margaret would have given. She'd tell you that forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn through becoming someone worthy of it. And then she'd tell you she loves you anyway. That sounds like her. He smiled, real and sad. I miss her. Every day, I agreed. Every single day. I drove home through Seattle traffic, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind clearer than it had been in months. At home, I pulled up my laptop and opened an email I'd been drafting for weeks. To Patricia Lawson. Subject, Pro Bono Cardiac Clinic Proposal. I'd been thinking about Mrs. Vance, about the patients who couldn't afford proper cardiac care, about the ones who fell through the cracks of a medical system that prioritized profit over people. David had preyed on the system's weaknesses. Maybe I could use my retirement to patch some of those holes. The proposal outlined a free cardiac screening clinic operating 1 day a week out of a community health center. Nothing fancy, just basic diagnostics, referrals for those who needed intervention, education for those who didn't. The kind of medicine I'd practiced before insurance companies and billing codes turned healing into business. I sent the email and looked at Margaret's photograph. What do you think, love? Is it enough? She smiled back at me, silent and eternal. My phone buzzed. Patricia. William, this is beautiful. Let's meet next week and make it happen. I stood and walked to my study window, looking out over the Seattle skyline where David's clinic had once stood. The building was empty now, a for-lease sign in the window. Someone else would fill that space eventually. Someone who hopefully remembered that medicine was supposed to be about healing. I'd lost my son to prison. I'd lost Margaret to cancer. I'd lost the naive belief that doing the right thing would make everything better. But I'd gained something too. Clarity. The understanding that being a good doctor and a good father required the same thing. Showing up, even when it was hard. Even when you'd rather be somewhere else. Even when the outcome was uncertain. David would serve his 8 years. He'd lose his medical career. But maybe if we both did the work, we'd find something more valuable than professional success. Maybe we'd find redemption. I raised a glass of water to Margaret's photo. I'd given up whiskey after she died, and made a promise to her memory. I would spend whatever years I had left being the man she'd always believed I could be. Not just the brilliant surgeon, not just the dedicated professional, but the father who showed up, the doctor who cared more about patients than profit, the man who understood that excellence without compassion was just another form of failure. First, do no harm, I whispered, even when it costs everything, especially then. Outside, the Seattle rain began to fall, washing the city clean, promising nothing except the chance to start again. That would have to be enough. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Dr. Hart's position? Let us know where you're listening from.